Hi, Dr. Jenks, and welcome to OCD Whisperer Podcast. And you run the Bay Area OCD and Anxiety Center, and I'm extremely excited that you are here with me today. Um, One of the things that that I know you specifically specialize in is also pediatric OCD, and so I know that people have questions. So I'm super excited to be able to specifically ask you things related to that. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm so excited to be here and to do this with you today.
Awesome. So the way I typically do it, like everybody already knows, is I like to just dive right on in there and ask the questions.
Okay, go for it.
Um, so one of the first questions I have is if you don't mind maybe telling us a little bit about pediatric OCD and how is it different than adult OCD? Like what would be those things that we might see or not see or not hear or not be familiar with?
Yeah, that's a really good question because, it takes, gosh, I think it's average of 12 to 15 years for a person to get an accurate diagnosis and effective treatment. And so it's true for kids as well, and kids and teens. The average age for a child to develop OCD is between the ages of either 8 and 12, so pretty young, or late teens and early 20s. And the majority of kids and teens who develop OCD, they do not get a proper diagnosis for years and years and years. And so, one of the things that comes up time and time again in my work is I see adults who had, to me, very clear signs of OCD when they were little, sometimes going back to 3 or 4. And
Mhm.
they were written off as just being kind of quirky kids, or a lot of kids have acting out behaviors like oppositional behaviors or angry, or and no one picked up on these behaviors, on OCD, until the individual themselves, when they were maybe in their 20s or 30s or maybe 40s, said, hey, I wonder if I might have OCD.
Mhm.
And so I think for kids, because kids don't generally have the information and insight about OCD, it's up to parents and teachers to pick it up. And most of the time, it just doesn't, or it gets swept under the carpet. And so I think that's one of the differences between, kids, pediatric OCD, and adults, is at least adults, Google.
Yeah.
and, and we'll Google OCD and hopefully find some accurate information. And kids Google too, and teens, of course, Google, but a lot of times they don't have the language. Most of the time, most kids and teens just think they're crazy.
Yeah.
And that's what I hear all of the time. It is the most common thing that kids tell me, is that, I just thought I was crazy and weird, and then they keep it a secret.
Got
So that's a big factor, with in adults. Yes, there can be that shame and that secrecy that does go on, but for kids and teens, they think they're crazy and they don't want anybody to know they're crazy. And so even if they're taken to a therapist and the therapist doesn't ask the right questions, they're not going to get the diagnosis.
Yeah, and I think that's really actually true because I definitely I have somebody recently I was actually talking to and they were mentioning that a lot of therapists that they've been seeing and they've I think saw up to like 10 different therapists, but that every person was not able to tell them like, yes, this is OCD. They're like, well, it could be. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. How what do you mean they couldn't tell you? Like
Yeah.
OCD is pretty, but I also understand like, yeah, if you're not trained in it, you can feel unsure, and so you're not going to feel confident to diagnose it. So that definitely
Yeah.
makes sense. Yeah. Well, that actually leads perfectly into the next question I have, which is with that and understanding that that happens, what could be some signs, right? What could be some of those things that could alert a parent that potentially this could be OCD at play? I mean, I know you mentioned some things like people can have some outbursts or um, maybe look like they're being oppositional.
Mhm.
But that it's not really driven per se by the fact that they're oppositional. It's driven out of that anxiety disorder. So what could be those things that parents can look for? What could be the questions they might ask to give them a clue to help them out?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, I get emails all the time, practically every single day, to be honest, with a parent saying, you know, I'm seeing these things, these kind of strange behaviors. My child has changed. They're not themselves anymore. You know, could this be OCD? And I congratulate them with just asking the question,
Yeah.
because I think most parents, well, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of parents, you know, will think that it'll just go away. So whatever's going on, whatever has changed in their child, they think, oh, it's just a phase, right? Oh, it'll just go away. But that's lost time
Yeah.
in providing the kid with treatment they need. And so the signs, you know, there's so much variety in signs. It's a little hard to say, like, here are the 10 signs, but I'll tell you like what I typically see. So I would recommend to parents to just look for changes.
Hmm.
So any sort of changes, maybe if there's subtle changes or more drastic changes, but what are you noticing that's changed? So there could be some new avoidance. So maybe your child who loved spaghetti before, now all of a sudden unexplicably won't eat spaghetti. Okay,
Hmm.
so that could be a normal kid thing, like, I don't know, but is it generalized? And what I mean by generalized is like, now it's spaghetti, now it's candy. Like, that's weird. They used to love candy. Now they won't even touch candy, you know, and now they won't eat any bread. Like it, so it's these things that kind of start spreading, and it almost has like tentacles. It's this one thing, now it's this thing, now it's this thing. So avoidance or avoiding, you know, avoiding walking to the kitchen anymore, or avoid not wanting to go play with friends anymore, or not wanting to get in the car. So big time, any avoidance. And then also repetitiveness. So anything that's repetitive. So questions are a big one for kids, right? Because parents usually have the answers to questions, and it's normal for us, for kids to ask questions of their parents. And so, but it's questions that repeat themselves. And you think, I just told her that. Why is she now asking me again and again? And she never seems satisfied. And these questions just keep going and going. And so that's a sign, right? Like I have a kid right now that has obsessions around getting appendicitis. And so he will ask, well, before I worked with them, he would ask endless questions about appendicitis. And
Hmm.
next thing you know, mom and kid are Googling appendicitis, right? So another thing could be mood. So looking for changes in mood. Do they now seem kind of sad and withdrawn? Are they not as interested in things that they, you know, used to be interested in? And are they doing kind of strange behaviors? Like, are they now tapping on things or knocking on things or washing their hands repeatedly or having to make something just right? So it kind of, there's a lot that that you could notice. And of course, anxiety. I didn't include that in my list, but yeah. So of course, fear and anxiety. That doesn't make sense to parents. Like, why would my child, you know, not want to go swimming all of a sudden where they were fine swimming before? And then you ask them and they might say, oh, well, what if there's a shark in the water? Like, where did that come from? You know?
And as you're talking, the other thing that comes to mind too is like maybe even a little bit of rigidity around things. Like I
Yeah,
have a teen right now I'm working with where definitely one of the things that was starting to stand out was that there's suddenly less and less flexibility, like things had
yeah,
to be a certain way. And if it wasn't, or if somebody did something, or it just was being themselves the way they normally would be, right? That the child would suddenly have an outburst and would
yeah,
start to, get really angry or yell or use swear words or
yes.
something would happen. They're like, whoa, what's going on? And so now the whole family is kind of being on eggshells
Walking on
and
eggshells.
starting
Yeah,
to accommodate and go, oh, okay, we don't want to set you off. Oh my gosh. And nobody's understanding what's happening.
yeah.
And
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, the flexibility and the rigidity are major red flags, right? I one of the things I do right up front is talk about how parents are accommodating their children's anxiety. And I do a lot of education and discussion about family accommodation, which is, basically doing things to try to um, help your child feel less anxious in the moment. So it's basically trying to protect your child and soothe your child. And it can happen passively. So like passively would be like you just they no longer want their friends invited over. And so you don't ask anymore. Or it can be more active. So maybe you guys stop watching a TV show, or you stop saying the word zombie, or like,
Yeah.
because they're afraid of zombies, like, so it's just any way whatsoever you try to bubble wrap your child. And it works in the short run. Your child does feel better in the short run, but in the long run it feeds fear and OCD and anxiety. Yeah, yeah,
Exactly, and then they get really reliant on you as their kind of reassurance figure or that
yeah,
supplies, if you will. Yeah, yeah, that's I love
exactly.
the bubble wrap. That's that just gave me such a little visual, like, yeah, we try to bubble wrap our kids, right? Because 'Cause they're kids, like, we wanna protect them.
It's natural. Yeah. And that's what I tell parents, is that this is an instinct. All mammals do it. All mammals try to bubble wrap their babies in different ways, right? You can see this in elephants. You can see this in any animal, dogs. And so it's just what mammals do. We instinctually care and protect our young. And
Mhm.
then, but if you have a child who's born with a genetic vulnerability to OCD and kind of comes out of the womb more anxious, then your kind of instinct is going to go into overdrive.
Yeah,
And it
absolutely.
backfires, unfortunately, for anxious kids.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, that's a really great point. Wow, yeah, I love that. Okay, well, then that leads to my, third question and my last question, which is, with all of this kind of information, what could be one thing that a parent can do to help their child? So if they're saying, okay, like they're listening right now and they're going, okay, so I'm going to pay attention to repetitive behaviors. I'm going to look at any kind of changes in routines or avoidances or kind of stuff that's starting to kind of, jump out at me that shifted and feel strange, or those repetitive questions. And now I'm seeing, okay, and I think it might be what could be something like just one thing. Let's say, I know it's always hard to answer a question like that, but what could be one thing that they could potentially do? What could be one tip that they could try?
Yeah, yeah. That's a great question. And I recently did a training called Space. And in the Space training, it's actually a treatment just for parents. And so we work with the parent to treat their child. So basically, the parent is treating the child. So, one of the first steps in Space is helping the parents really understand the accommodation cycle, because we have research that says that the more parents accommodate, the worse a child's OCD and anxiety will get.
Mhm.
And so I think working with families, going for accommodation right away up front is number one thing. And so just one thing you can do is read about accommodation. Um, Even if you can literally Google a list of all various ways that parents accommodate. It's called the Family Accommodation Scale, FAS, and just Google that. It'll come up with a list. Read it with your your partner, and then take the questionnaire yourselves,
Mhm.
and then do a log. So literally every day, just write time, date, what did I do to accommodate?
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then start with that. And then either on your own, if you decided to that you're gonna kind of do this on your own, or with a therapist, an OCD specialist,
Mhm.
work on one by one reducing your accommodation.
Yeah.
And yeah, and that takes, some families can do that on their own through kind of watching videos. Like I really recommend Natasha Daniels videos on that. Um, and on my own YouTube channel, I have videos about accommodation and how to go about that. Um, so that's my one piece of advice. Work on accommodation first.
That's, I think, a really great starting point. Yeah, beautiful. Wow, you named a bunch of different resources. So this leads to my ending, which is how can people find you, and what are those different resources that they can look up? And of course, I'll include everything in the show notes.
Okay. Yeah, so people can find me in a couple different ways. I have a Facebook page for my practice. So if you just look up Bay Area OCD and Anxiety, I'm also on Instagram at Bay Area OCD and Anxiety. And YouTube channel, you can also just look me up that way. That's brand new, so I'm still working on that. But there's lots of kind of virtual, videos that you can go through, no matter what your level of knowledge and experience, or if you're an adult, a teen, kid, parent. There's videos there to guide you. Um, I'm in private practice. So I actually now live in Boise, Idaho, but my practice is in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I only treat people in California. And you can find me through my website, Bay Area OCD and Anxiety.
Beautiful. And if I can go back for 1 second, what's the name of your YouTube channel?
My YouTube channel is Bay Area OCD and Anxiety Center.
Beautiful. Okay. Very easy. Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Okay, you too. Bye bye.